This video is brought to you by Squarespace.
This right here is called a Kendama. It's a very simple toy that's made up of 3 different cups. So you have one here, and one here. On top of that, you have the spike and the ball, which has a hole in it. And with this seemingly simple toy, people do things like this. But what you might not have expected of this very addictive toy is that it has an entire economy around it. Professional players.
8, 7.
And for a brief spell, it got popular in the world of hip hop. In today's video, we are going to explore how the hell that all happened. So our story begins back in the 1600s in France. Now it's a weird one because many people believe that Kendama's origins are in Japan. But Kendama scholars argue that the Kendama actually came from France in the 1600s. There's even indication that it may have come from Greece or China. But for the sake of this video, let's just give it to the French. The Kendama that existed in France was much different to the one that we have here. In fact, it didn't go by the name Kendama, it went by the name of Bilboquet, which is a terrible name. Sounds really bad. Bilboquet. Which was effectively the ball and cup. Now, if you ever play a Kendama around your granddad, he's gonna say,
Yeah, we used to have that as a kid. It was called ball and cup.
No, granddad, this is a Kendama. However, your granddad is right. Originally, the Bilboquet was a ball and cup. It wouldn't have had all these different cups and the spike. It would literally have just been the ball and the cup. But people eventually realized they needed to level up the toy. So the word we know today as Kendama originated in Japan via the Silk Road. This happened in the Edo period, which was between 1603 and 1863, and it's believed to have originated in the Japanese city of Nagasaki. This was because Nagasaki was the only Japanese city at the time to allow foreign trade, and at this time the Kendama was primarily a drinking game. It would be the sort of thing where you would challenge someone to do a skill. Hey Paul, yeah, I bet you can't land this on that first time. That's easy, mate, I can do that. No, if you miss it though, you gotta take a shot, blood. I can do that, give it here. However, it wasn't until the MEIJI period that the Japanese Ministry of Education would introduce the Kendama in a report on children's education in 1876. So from what I can understand, they actually encouraged Kendama in schools. And I'm pretty sure I got a detention for bringing my Kendama to school. From here, Kendama took off amongst young people in Japan. In 1919, the precursor to today's Kendama went on sale under the name the Nichigetsu ball, and it became a huge hit.
Before we go any further, a massive thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Squarespace is an easy to use platform for making professional and amazing quality websites. Having a top quality website is super important for any business. Squarespace makes the whole process of making a website super easy and affordable. If you go for a web developer, you can end up sinking a ton of money into them, and then you rely on them for any edits you want to make to the website. With Squarespace, it's totally under your control. With tons of templates to choose from, you can find a look that's perfect for your brand. On top of that, Squarespace has a ton of built-in features, like e-commerce, appointment scheduling, email marketing campaigns, and more. Whenever I've made a website in past, I've always used Squarespace. So be sure to head over to squarespace.com to start your free trial today. And to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain, use the code Jimmy the Giant. Anyway, back to the video.
The Nichigetsu ball was different to the ball and cup that was popular before. It had new cups and new options which allowed a massive variety of tricks to be done. All the way up to 1989, we would see tons of variations of what we call the Kendama now, with different shaped cups, different sizes, etc. After the end of World War II in 1945, Kendamas were super common and they were typically sold in sweet shops. But it wasn't until 1975 where a children's author by the name of FUJIWARA ISSEI founded the Japan Kendama Association. The Japan Kendama Association, or the JKA, would go on to standardize the Kendama, as well create rules for a competitive format. With this rule set and competitive specifications for the Kendama, Kendama grew into a serious sport across Japan. And there would be a ton of competitions within schools. And these were like serious competitions. They weren't just some crappy after school club. If you won one of these competitions, the Minister of Education would give you an award. Between the 80s to the 90s, Kendama was officially popping in Japan. But the rest of the world knew nothing about it. In the Western world during the 90s, the things that were popular were like yo-yo and juggling. They were like the skill toys that were popular in the West. But then this would all change. In an era unlike any other. The 2000s. Dial-up internet, your PlayStation 2 saves corrupting, and Crazy Frog. The 2000s was a real time to be alive. With the rise of the internet and viral videos, the kendama for the first time would leave the borders of Japan and go international. In the early days of YouTube, we would see videos pop up of these young kids playing kendama. In 2006, a company by the name of Kendama USA was founded, and kendama started to grow in America. But interestingly, it wasn't in schools. Unlike the many endless fads of the 2000s like Pokemon cards, Crazy Bones, kendama, when it came to America, rather interestingly found its home in action sports like snowboarding, BMX, and rollerblading. For some reason, there was something about kendama that these sporting communities absolutely loved. But why? Well, to answer that question, I'm going to speak from my personal experience. My journey in the world of kendama started in 2010. At this same time, I had just got into the sport of parkour. In the world of parkour, kendamas were everywhere. Every training session, you would see a kendama. You couldn't escape them. It was the go-to activity that you would do at the end of a parkour session. After a long day's training, you were tired, you were warming down, someone would bust out the kendama and a circle would form of people playing kendama. But prior to this, I had never heard of kendama, ever. I'd never seen it online, I'd never seen it anywhere. And what I find weird is, well, why is parkour, BMX, snowboarding, rollerblading, why did these sports take a particular interest in the kendama? Was there a link between these kinds of sports and kendama? In my opinion, yes. Like, absolutely. However, it isn't like the risk-taking or adrenaline side that gets people into kendama. It's something much simpler than that. And that is the feeling of pulling off a trick, or a sequence of tricks, and doing it perfectly. You see, all of these action sports I mentioned, they have a commonality amongst them. They are often practiced in runs or lines, moves in which you meticulously perfect. That feeling you get when you do the thing really perfectly is pretty much the exact same feeling you get when you land a trick on a kendama. And when I first picked up the kendama, I got that feeling instantly. And just how quickly you go from cack-handedly trying to get it into the cup to eventually perfecting the spike. You might have spent like half an hour, like a few 100+ goes at trying to land this trick. The moment that you hear the sound of the spike, that's when the addiction sets in.
Left hand.
I remember specifically after one long day of doing parkour, all of us went and stayed at a friend's house and very quickly the kendama came out. And someone set a challenge that you can't sleep until you landed a certain trick. I believe that trick was the lighthouse or something like that, I can't remember its name. And no word of a lie, one of my friends stayed up till 3 AM trying to get this one trick. Staying up all night for that one moment where the kendama lands and it stays there perfectly. It's in my opinion that the kendama is effectively a condensed version of action sports. You might be trying one trick and you try it like 100+ times. You battle for it.
100! Oh! No way! Are you kidding me? Yeah, look at this!
And eventually you land it. The sense of relief and like euphoria that you've done it is very similar to action sports. And if you're watching this and you've never done an action sport, you've never done skateboarding or anything like that, I still imagine you know what this feeling I'm talking about is. If you've ever thrown a tea bag into a teacup from a distance, and you've spent like 10-15 minutes trying to make the shot, and you eventually get it, it's that feeling right there that is basically what kendama is in a nutshell. And it's my belief that people who are into action sports probably have some kind of predisposition to loving that feeling. But that aside, this doesn't explain how the kendama ended up in the hands of rappers. Over time, the kendama would get very popular across the world. In 2008, Germany would hold the first ever international kendama event called the Kendama Open. The Kendama Open would then go to the USA in 2013, and then finally the first ever Kendama World Cup in 2014. And so kendama was getting big, and and like serious. There were big companies, there were pros. It was becoming a big deal. And with this rise in popularity that was bred through these small sporting communities, one person would come along and completely revolutionize the kendama. And that person is Adam22. Adam22 is the owner of No Jumper. Throughout the 2010s, and specifically the SoundCloud rap era, No Jumper was massive. And they would have tons of interviews with very famous rappers. They would do vlogs with them. You would see people like Lil Peep, Trippie Redd, Lil Pump, all of these kind of people. Famously, they had the first ever interview with XXXtentacion.
Today we're here with
XXXtentacion.
And No Jumper would catch these rappers before they really blew up and become cultural icons. It would kind of be like this final push into absolute stardom. Adam22 was a tastemaker.
a couple of guys that I have an enormous amount of faith in, that I really believe are going to be tearing up the rap world over the course of the next year. I got Bubba and Trippie Redd and Lil Wop.
But before all of this, Adam22 was known in the world of BMX. He was a pretty good BMXer himself, but he was known as a BMX filmer. He even went on to open a BMX store called On Some
Baba Bowie.
which I probably can't say in this video. We first started to see Adam playing with a kendama around 2017. It would appear in tons of No Jumper content. And if we look at Google Trends, we can see a massive spike around 2017. And at this point, Adam22 actually started to incorporate kendama into his personal brand. So I was really curious to find out from Adam22 himself, how did he find out about kendama? And amazingly, I reached out to Pasha the Boss, who asked his wife Riley Reid to contact Adam22. I mean, just saying that aloud, I don't know how I managed to wangle that, but here it is.
About 10 or 11 years ago, a bunch of like snowboarders or skiers or some
Baba Bowie.
they were out in Japan and they saw it while they were out there, because like in Japan, basically like kids will just play with it, or even like businessmen and some like older people, they'll play with it, but in like a really simple way. And then these like snowboarder American dudes or whatever found out about it, and they started fucking with it, but in like a way more like creative freestyle, like basically sort of skateboard or like snowboard inspired way of thinking about it. And then it basically just sort of spiraled from there, where like some of these guys that were into it just kept getting more and more into it, and they started brands and they started to try to get more people into it.
From here, Adam would basically introduce rappers to kendama. Every time they would come to the store to do a podcast or a vlog or something like that, you'd quite often see Adam just give them a kendama and try and get them to land a trick.
Yo, why are rappers so good at this?
Kendama would become part of the aesthetic and brand of No Jumper. These rappers were massive names in pop culture. And for a short moment, kendama was the cool thing. This Japanese kids toy had now become cool. More and more kendamas were being put out with these really cool designs. And sometimes people would just have them on them as kind of like swag. It was the aesthetic. And from this, the competitions were getting bigger, more and more pro kendama players existed, and now there was a full-blown economy around this kids toy that weirdly kids didn't really play. It was mainly adults. And like, I'm just talking about kendama as like a cultural thing, but all the while, the skill level for kendama just went astronomical. However, eventually this major fad in 2017 would have to die down a little bit. So it's definitely not as popular as it was in 2017, but kendama is still massive. It's still going strong with major competitions and pros and new people getting into it. And ever since the SoundCloud rap era came to an end, you don't really see it amongst rappers anymore. But the core audience and fan base of kendama is still very strong. The big brands that exist are stuff like Sweet Kendamas, Kendama London, and Crom, who actually went on to collaborate with a parkour brand called Ashigaru. The kendamas these days have these amazing designs, and I know mine's a little bit boring, but there's plenty of really cool ones out there. But to be honest, I'm still just kind of surprised that kendama never took off in like schools. At least as far as I'm aware, I don't exactly know the goings on in the school playground anymore, but I don't think they ever took off in the same way that yo-yos did in the 90s. So it does lead me to think that that is a possibility for the future of kendama. It's been a pretty wild ride for the kendama, all the way from the 1600s as the ball and cup to this. And to be honest, even though I hardly play it these days, I have a very soft spot for the kendama. And whenever I do pick it up, it's just as fun as what I remember it being when I first got into it. We love you, kendama. I just wanted to add in quickly, we have got new merch over on the Jimmy the Giant website. It's called Vision, and I'm so happy with how it came out. You can massively help me and this channel out by picking something up on the website, or by using the sponsored link or supporting me on Patreon. Peace.